Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hello, welcome back. I'm so glad you're with us today. So, if you have ever been confused by the IEP or 504 process, I have an expert to talk to us today. Her name is Kathryn Otto, and she is an educational advocate with a doctorate in education and emphasis on special education. Kathy collaborates with parents who have children who are in the process of being identified for an individual education plan, IEP. During the IEP process, Kathy provides parents with guidance, information, legal and practical, about the process of an evaluation, development of the IEP, the completion of the final paperwork, and the initiation of services for the completed IEP. Her goal is to ensure that parents feel that they are not alone in the IEP meeting and that they can focus on their child and not the IEP process itself. Okay, I've said IEP a million times. So with that, I will welcome Kathy.
Thank you very much. I am excited to be here.
Yes. Okay, so we're going to be talking about IEPs and 504s and also this really important job that you do, which is as an IEP or 504 advocate. Can you talk about or kind of start with what an advocate does?
Well, depending on the situation, whatever we need to do. Typically, I have, at least in the state of Kansas, a good understanding of IEP law. I'm not a lawyer, so I wouldn't begin to say that, but I have been in education for several years. So I understand IEPs and how they work and what school districts can do, what they can't do. And then I, listen to parents. So ideally, I help those families and those schools come together to meet the legality of the law for the school district, but still for parents to be able to advocate what they need for their child.
Okay, awesome. Which I think can be, this process of getting a 504 or an IEP can be very stressful and hard for parents and emotional.
It is usually because a lot of children, they're identified in early childhood or even through parents as teachers. Then other children are not. They're not identified until they're in elementary school, sometimes even middle school.
Yeah.
And so then you have all these problems that have been going on for a long time, and parents concerned and talking to teachers, but teachers saying, oh, no, he's fine or she's fine. And yet they're not up to grade level, for instance. And so it is, by the time they come to me, it's a frustrating situation for everyone, both sides.
Sure. Yeah. Can you talk about a time where you supported a kid who had maybe been like overlooked, like this part of like they didn't identify the need, or maybe they didn't know there was a need, but the kid had, or the family felt overlooked, and what changes happened once you kind of stepped in to support them?
And usually, Bryce, that's going to happen with children who have learning disabilities that are, allow them, especially in the early grades, to kind of get along and to be able to read and do math. But then the older they get, the less they're able to do that because the print is harder, the words are harder, the comprehension questions are harder. Same way with math. And so then everybody starts saying, well, let me use a general education intervention. And so that's, depending on the school district and what they call it, that is an extra reading group with a reading specialist or a math specialist, but it's not special education. So there's this whole process of steps, and parents are always saying, but it's not working. And it probably isn't. But then, we have to come together, have an evaluation, look at those evaluation results, and then identify what do we need to do to help that child? So it's a huge process, and it's not, there's nothing easy about it
Yeah.
at
Takes
all.
time.
And
Lots
so
of data collection. Yeah.
I sit in and try and help negotiate those concerns.
Okay. So let's step back and say, okay, so you said there's like level 1 intervention or a general education intervention.
Mhm.
So what I hear you saying is kids can receive supports before they have an IEP or a 504. Is that potentially
Absolutely.
true? Okay.
Yeah, I would say and we're in Johnson County and the surrounding counties. All of those districts have some kind of reading specialist at the elementary age. Sometimes someone who will support math concerns, speech and language, although you get to an IEP for that. But some of those services the team can look at and say, okay, his reading scores are low. Let's put him in a reading group with other children who have the same kinds of issues. And let's see what happens if he has more specialized instruction, but not special education.
Okay. So when does it reach the level of special education? So an IEP must be when special education is involved. Is that correct?
Right. You only have an IEP if your child has gone through an evaluation and it's a school evaluation. A lot of parents do private evaluations. School districts have to take them by law, take that evaluation into consideration, but it can't drive the IEP. The school districts are responsible for their evaluation and their information that goes into the IEP.
Okay.
Most of the time that's all the same, but not always.
Sure. So once they get that evaluation done, then if you have an IEP, then you're considered to be getting special education services, which
Yeah.
there are different teachers that provide special education services, but maybe not for everything. Maybe it's just like a part of the day or one piece of the day. Is that correct?
Right. It would be, yes, because anymore, schools are pretty inclusive in their settings. So students aren't just pulled out a full day and then, not interact with their peers. They're always in classes, as many classes in that gen ed room as they can be. And not everybody has a reading disability and a math disability.
Sure.
So, there may be a student that is in reading in his gen ed class and everything is fine, but pulled out for math. So it's a kind of a mix up of, and in resources, in a resource room, it is maybe 45 minutes a day that they're out, and the rest of the time they're in with their peers in third grade.
So why do we do that? What's the thought behind more inclusive settings? Why don't we pull kids all day like they used to? Why do they do more inclusive work?
Part of it is, and there's no, it's, that's just, it's my thought about that's how it works. So there's no order in it. There are social skills that if you're pulled out all day, you miss a lot of social skills, anywhere from bullying to, being a nice kid, because everything goes on in those rooms.
Sure.
You lose that ability to sit in a group and problem solve about what do we do? How does that math part work? What is the science lesson and how do we create it? So there's a lot of things that kids do that in a general ed classroom have all different abilities in science or in math, or they like, social studies. So it allows in that gen ed classroom for all of us to kind of find a level, if you will, where we can learn to cooperate, respect kids that are, understand, and you are the kid that understands a different subject level. It's really better. Plus, if you don't need support in reading, why would you want to be pulled out when you don't need that level of support? If you need reading, yes, but then you might not be pulled out for math. So it's a good leveler, and I think it's important.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just thinking like parents wondering, why is my kid pulled out for this? Or maybe they have a diagnosis that's pervasive that would be like through all of the topics. And so then, you know, my daughter talks about, like, there's some kids in our class that are like part of our class, but they're gone a lot of the day, but then they come in and sometimes they have supportive people. And so, like, as a parent, you know, I'm thinking about like helping my kids also to understand what special education looks like, and then also how to be inclusive, just like for us, like, you know, the kids that might be developing in a way where the traditional school education or the level 1 interventions work for, then it's, you know, creating that appreciation for different kids with different brains and different levels and successes and things that they need to work on. And so, you know, sometimes I think understanding that part helps parents too, to understand what times we get pulled out and not.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
it is like a spectrum, you know. Mm-hmm. So some gifted would be one end of the spectrum. That is all in Kansas is a special education action. They have individuals in Kansas have IEPs if they're gifted.
Yes.
They don't look like the others. They're a little streamlined, but it is that whole continuum of individuals who can't do a lot, but they still come visit and try and have some kind of understanding of what their peers look like. And their peers have an understanding of what does an individual look like that can't walk, that needs a wheelchair, that can't talk. Yes. So I think that's what inclusion probably accomplishes the most of, is that we know each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So pause on the general IEP stuff, but you brought up gifted, which I love that you did, because I think a lot of times parents don't recognize that if you have a kid who's gifted, and maybe every state has a little bit different laws or rules around this, but in the state of Kansas, gifted is an IEP, and that allows them the opportunity to get pulled out for special instruction. But it's different. It's not remedial or on grade level, right? It's advanced. So can you explain that part just a little bit?
Well, and it's different depending on what school district you're in. Mm-hmm. So some individuals identified as gifted get on a bus one day, one morning, or one afternoon a week, and they travel to the gifted center. Yes. And then they do activities there. Other districts have gifted teachers in every building. Mm-hmm. And so then those individuals just go out for a gifted class and come in. Mm-hmm. And it is really just providing them information that is a little above what they would get in a general education classroom, above just reading higher level books, or it's depending on the teachers, it's experiments, it's creating things. It kind of pulls at children's minds more about what else can you do, mm-hmm. and how can you do it. So I think it's wonderful. Many states don't have gifted IEPs. So.
Yeah. Which I think is a loss, because then we don't know for sure what exactly is happening, and tracking those things and keeping those kids access to those resources. But you have to present with a certain IQ or some type of advancement in order to gain access to that resource, correct?
Yeah. And again, that's a state guideline, and you can get on in Kansas. You can go to Kansas Department of Education and look up all of the rules about anything special, any and all things special education. I do that occasionally still, and it's it's a good resource, because it is what school districts must adhere to, mm-hmm. in the state. They can't wiggle from the state norms.
Yeah. Okay. So talk to me about, I think oftentimes there's a feeling of, we have the school on one side and parents on the other, and the school does not want to give the resources. The parents want the resources. So there's this conflict. Is there space where you think that you can turn maybe resistance into partnership? And what is the turning point of that? Or like, what helped make that happen?
Well, that's my job, basically. Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
It is, I just read something the other day, and it struck me because it truly is. We as parents, we go in thinking, well, they don't want to do that because they can't afford it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really not anywhere in the state regulations that says if you can't afford a para, then you don't have to provide one. That
Mm-hmm.
IEP team makes that decision about what a child needs, where, how much, with whom, and the parents are part of that team. So when we're at odds, what I try to do is go in, and it helps if I can go in towards the beginning as opposed to when everybody's kind of set in their ways.
Mm-hmm.
But my job is to go in and talk to parents about what they want, and then go into that room and with the staff and try to make them both come together. And for the most part, I'm pretty lucky about that. I don't know if it's lucky or skill or what it is, but as long as we're sitting there talking, then and listening, then we're going to get somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Rarely do I have meetings where there's this wall and I don't feel like we can get past it, because truly administrators, teachers, they're not there to tell you no, but they are there to follow the rules. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
rules is if you don't qualify for special education, then you shouldn't have that service, because then that's doing almost a child a disservice. And where it's hard is those individuals who are lower, have more difficulty reading, but they don't qualify for special education. And
Mm-hmm.
then we have to work it through with looking at test results, looking at data, talking about data. Um, Individuals with behaviors, just because you have a behavior doesn't mean you need to go to special education. It means
Mm-hmm.
what have we done to eliminate, to support, to work out that behavior, and then talk about special education. And that
Mm-hmm.
is where we end up sometimes, is at the very end of, yeah, but he's up to 10 suspensions, and now we've got to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And so that makes it a more difficult discussion, but we can still do it.
Sure. So let's say a kid has a diagnosis, like they have dyslexia, right? There's a different way that their brain learns to read or is decoding sounds. And they say, like, just because they have the diagnosis, does that mean that you would get an IEP?
Not necessarily. Typically, there is in Kansas, there is a new checkbox, if you will, that says that this child has been identified with dyslexia.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's new. We didn't used to. It was specific learning disabilities is where
Uh-huh.
everybody fell. I think it helps, and I think again, as people, as teachers, as educators, we learn more and more. We're learning more about not just learning disabilities, but what are those pieces that aren't a whole, but a part
Mm-hmm.
that we have to educate. So
Mm-hmm.
we're getting better at saying, okay, dyslexia, and it's focused on reading, or dyscalculia, it's focused on math,
Yeah.
and identifying how they can have just that level of support. And then it comes down to what kind of score, where do they score on those ranges to
Mm-hmm.
fall into a I need an IEP category.
So something I was thinking about with that is sometimes I'll have parents come in and say, I'm afraid for my kid to get the intervention because if they get better, then they won't get the IEP. So then it's like, okay, and I understand that, right? Because they're saying, what happens if, they get the intervention now, but then like they don't get it the next year, or they don't have the resources, or this teacher leaves and they don't hire a replacement, or they go to a different school, like they leave for middle school. So I appreciate the concerns of like saying, like, I want it documented that my kid has
Mhm.
a challenge with math or reading or writing. There's something different about how they learn. There's obviously a lot of other reasons that kids get IEPs, but thinking about some of the most common things that I hear about are the learning differences, right? So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts to that? How do you respond to that line of thought?
Well, at some level, if you've been in special education and you've actually gained those skills that you no longer qualify, that is at some level a celebration, because it means that not you as a parent, not the teachers at school, but that child has actually been able to learn through that disability. And 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 so even if you leave an IEP, there is a 504, and that will not pull a child out into special education, but a 504 does provide a lot of modifications and accommodations that an individual might need to continue to be successful. There's also still going to be that small math group, that small reading group, which typically are the two areas that when you come out of an IEP, that's feasible depending on your level, that you would go back into that general ed support, which is also what a 504 is. It's not special education, it's general education. So there are workarounds. Some parents, they pull and go, to after school supports. Some are able, especially as you get more into middle school and high school, you're able to take different levels of courses.
Sure.
And that will also help, because if you have dysgraphia, you can't read, you probably won't leave special education truly. But if you're at that place where you can, then you need to work at getting that support in that gen ed setting. And usually we can work that out. It doesn't happen a lot to the individuals that I work with that they don't continue to have an IEP, because everything, even when they've gotten up to here, then the grade level is still going up. So that keeping up is not necessarily, it doesn't happen often.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So it's thinking of it as a celebration, but that, when we're meeting milestones, but also new objectives can be written, right? So like we can have goals and we can meet them, and then we can reassess like what other goals do we need to get a kid on grade level, right? Because that's really the goal, is to have a kid on grade level.
Yes. Okay. Or again, if you're not, grade level is one thing, but again, as they write goals, the goals aren't necessarily, he'll read at a 5th grade level. They should be more identified at where's the hole in reading. So, it might say we'll read at 90% at a 4th grade level, but the idea behind that would be, and you've got all the phonemes and you've got all the other pieces of reading that and now we're working on putting it all together and throwing in the comprehension. Because again, you can read, but that doesn't mean you know necessarily what you've read.
Sure.
So it just keeps moving along, ideally.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that's good to know that the overall goal is to get to grade level, but we may be kind of far away from that, or we may be really relatively not too far, right? We wouldn't be super close and then get an IEP. We would probably do gen ed support then, is what I hear you saying. And so then you would be working towards that. So the goal might seem kind of far back, but we're trying to keep moving forward to keep progressing towards the ultimate skill. Makes sense.
Yes. There's no point in trying to read on a 5th grade level if you can't read 3rd grade words. Yeah. So it does really have to just build upon itself.
Yeah. So, okay. So I guess maybe this would be a good time to talk about like the difference between 504 and IEP, because I think oftentimes this is a really confusing thing. So like you might go in for an IEP meeting and come out with a 504 and be like disappointed, but or you may not even know that there's a 504 or whatever it is. So can you help us understand what the logistical difference are between the IEP and 504?
So a 504 is considered a general education action or program. And so there are no goals and objectives written. There's no pullout, unless it would be like to a reading specialist, but a 504 is, for the most part, accommodations modifications that can be applied to that child's daily education. So an accommodation would be everybody else has 30 math problems and he has 15.
Okay.
You're not changing the grade level. And that's the thing, accommodations and modifications are hard because an accommodation is what it's just changing the amount of work you have to do. You, instead of writing out a full sentence, there may be a sentence and you have to plug in X number of words to make the sentence make sense. But it's a fifth grade sentence. It's not a first grade sentence. A modification then is when you're literally changing the level of work. So, and usually you don't see modifications on a 504 because if you're changing the level of work, then that's a special education issue.
Got it.
So those are 504s and they go to every teacher and every teacher is to implement whatever the accommodations are on that program. And there's other things like can go to the counselor when they're tired or, can leave and go to the restroom or leave class early in order to miss all the craziness of middle school passing. So there's a lot of accommodations that some schools will say, well, we do that for everybody. And other schools will say, yeah, let's get it on the document so we make sure it happens. An IEP then, those are goals and objectives, and they are written specifically for each individual. And that both require a meeting. Parents have to be there. Parents have to give consent. Parents have to consent not to have those documents. So if you're in an IEP meeting and they say, well, it's all done, he's finished, he's all great, and you disagree with that, there are certain steps that you can take within that school to just say, okay, whoa. We want to see maybe more data. We're not seeing him reading like that at home. So, let's do some more evaluations. You also can't just go sit in a meeting and say, okay, he's done, because parents have to sign off on that IEP and they can say no. And then that can't happen. So they have control on an IEP. They have control of accommodations, modifications. They have a control over, oh gosh, my mind just went blank. So it'll come to me in a minute. They don't have control over, parents don't have control over the goals and objectives. Those are controlled by the school and the teachers and the staff. So, it's good to know that when you sit in a meeting, if you don't like a goal, you can have that discussion about the steps or how it needs to be, or why this number of, why 30 problems instead of 20. I mean, you can have all those discussions. The school district gets to choose that. When you go to change an accommodation or modification, you have total control over that. And the other one is you have total control as a parent over the number of minutes your child's being served. So as a team, you have to come to agreement that we want him pulled out 30 minutes, 5 days a week to go to the special education teacher for math. And next year, the team says, well, he doesn't need that anymore. They have to provide the documentation, the evaluation and documentation. But if the parents don't agree, then you're sitting at stalemate until we can work out what does happen. Do we reduce it? You can reduce an IEP number of minutes by 15%.
Without the parents' consent or?
Without consent.
Okay. Okay. So who is on an IEP team?
Always the administrator of the building. So, elementary, that's typically the principal. At middle school, it's a vice principal. At high school, it could be any number of vice principals. If they have speech services, you have a speech path. They have OT, PT, all those other little pieces that make up what does your child need. Always the teacher, typically the school psychologist, but the school psychologist is only required to be at a meeting if you're providing information on testing.
Okay.
So, because that's their job is to share information about testing, and then parents, and that's, I think that's it. The teacher, the general education teacher too, is required to be there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the special ed teacher and the general education
both.
teacher.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And that those two are required, and the administrator, and then
Okay.
the rest.
Okay. Well, I think it's helpful to know who you're walking into, because sometimes, again, that like us against them part of feeling like I don't know, when I've been to IEP meetings, it seems like the educators sit on one side and then the parents sit on the other. And so, it has this feeling of a division, even though maybe the goals are that, hopefully the goals are that everybody is there to help support that child.
Yeah. And it always is with me too. And so I pick, I sit next to usually the mom, because I don't like to sit between them. So usually I sit between next to the mom. And then I tell the families that I work with that we can write notes back and forth. We can whisper. If we're concerned about anything, we lean over and whisper. We can text each other on the phone and say, I don't like this, and not have to say a word. So I try to keep that communication with parents ongoing. My job is to make them feel safe and that they're being heard. And teams don't always listen to parents because they don't think we have the right perspective, I think, because it's our baby, and,
Sure.
So I can bring some of that to parents by just saying, yeah, no, that's right, that we can't do that one. But no, school, you can't do that,
Yeah.
And I have said, no, you can't change that. You can't change that amount of hours a kid has, because that's way over, maybe 25%. See, I've forgotten that statistic, but they can only change so much. And I have been in meetings where they deleted hours from an hour to 30 minutes. And I said, you can't, that won't work. There's a rule. So, that helps parents feel like they have a voice.
Yeah.
And if it's my voice.
Yeah.
And we do for a meeting.
Yeah, sure. Well, and I think, it's important to have that support system there. And I think there are other people like you around the nation who also do this advocacy work. And I think, even as somebody who knows a lot about IEPs, I am certainly not the leading expert, and I continue to read and learn about things, but I go to IEP meetings, and I feel like people like you are definitely better suited, and depending on what it is, right? Sometimes there are things where, I have a lot of times, for me, it's more of mental health diagnoses where it's like, we also need a space to test in a separate room. And they're like, well, we already do that. And I'm like, I understand, but not everybody does. And the kid needs to be prompted and those kind of things. So there are different roles, but people that do advocacy can advocate for all of the pieces, whether it's educational or emotional. And sometimes that's a 504 plan. Can you have both a 504 and an IEP?
No.
Okay. So if you have goals that would not change educational things, like you have glasses or a hearing aid or something like that, and that would be something that maybe if they didn't need any additional educational things adjusted, but they have a hearing aid and we need to make sure they're wearing it and check it and whatever, that would be something that could be added to their IEP. Or no? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Again, if it's a hearing aid, and for especially a younger individual that doesn't understand how to care for it or change it, or then usually it's typically the nurse monitors that, and then as they get older, you still monitor it because they don't want to wear them.
Yes.
Or
Dang it. Yeah.
don't like the way it looks, or so you do that. And I want to backtrack a minute, because I think too, what advocates do, at least the ones I like, are that sitting in the middle is supposed to be a negotiation. I'm the negotiator, not the person who says you can't do that, and we're not going to do that, because I don't feel like that strong arm kind of hard approach gets you anywhere with school teachers. I didn't like it when I was sitting on the teacher side and an advocate would come in and, make all these statements about, you will do this and you will do that. And we are only all human. So, so I try to make sure that I can be in the middle somewhere, so that we all walk out smiling.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, I think anytime you're in a negotiation, probably everybody feels a little bit like they lost. I don't know. At least that's what I hear about with attorneys. Not that you're an attorney, but but then it's like, but maybe it's a more positive experience is the ideal part where everybody feels like they won for the kid.
I think it helps if you're an educator, which is one of my advantages, because I was an educator, a special educator, for a long, long time. So that helps when I walk in, because I'm not that person. I'm not that lawyer who says, well, here's what the law says, but doesn't understand the give and take of, no, you can't have the same para all day long, because A, that's not good for the kiddo, but because, everybody needs a break and they need to move on and they need to do different things. And so I can help explain some of that.
Yeah,
and
that is helpful.
Yeah, some advocates don't know because they've never taught.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Are there common missteps or challenges that you feel like parents encounter early in the IEP or 504 journey? And how do you help them move through those kind of obstacles?
Truly the biggest thing when parents call, the first 15 minutes, 20 minutes of our conversation is all about the things that they're afraid of, the things that they don't know. Can they do that? Can they say my son has to spend a whole day in special education? Or can they say, no, if he runs out the building, we're calling the police? I mean, there's just so much that parents don't know what their rights are, or what they can say or not say, and how they can impact those teachers to understand what's best for their child. So I think, to me, that their fear of not knowing, of not trusting, of feeling like there's nobody on their side of the table. There's 12 people over there on that side and 2 over here. And then we start, as teachers, we start throwing out initials, the PWN, and that is also horrible.
Yeah.
So,
well, and it's hard. I mean, even doing what I do, our school district that my kids go to changed their reading measure. And so it's like, even I'm like, wait, what is that? Like, and they're like, oh, this is a new, we have a new measure for this. And I'm like, okay. And so, as a therapist, I'm interested to understand, but I'm also like, I mean, okay, so why did we change from the old? Like, I'm like, give me some information. I think it gets overwhelming too, where you're just like the initials, but then also not knowing what your rights are, like where you can speak up and where this is within the laws, right? Like what they're doing is they're following the law, even if we don't really love it. But then, I think it can be very overwhelming. And I think I don't know if you feel this way, but I feel like there is a feeling among parents, like there are parents who want their kids to have an IEP and parents who don't, right? Like, so maybe the school is saying, hey, we need an IEP. Like, we need this kid to be in special education. And that parent is like, no way. I want them to just be normal. Right. And I don't want them to feel picked on or pulled out of class. And I don't want any of that. Or there's the parents who are like, I definitely need my kid to be pulled out. I definitely need them to get these support services. There's not a lot of middle.
No, there isn't. There really isn't. And that's the hard bargain, because the middle is that place where a child doesn't necessarily qualify for an IEP because of his IQ, or because of where, again, on all the testing, they're that low average, range, and that doesn't qualify you for an IEP. It would a 504 maybe, and it would some reading specialist help, but that's it. So it is very frustrating to sit there and have schools say, well, we can't do anything. And I think that's part of, again, why parents go out and get private evaluations,
Sure.
because, and they're not inexpensive by any means,
No.
but that information from a private psychologist or psychiatrist is a much better, it's not much better, but it holds a different weight than a school psychologist. School psychologists are certified at one level, and the psychologists that you might see for outside of school testing have a different level of certification. So they're allowed to diagnose autism, learning disabilities. They can do that, where a school psychologist really is not supposed to diagnose.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, and I think that's a hard part too, is they shouldn't put a label like that to it, supposedly, within the schools, right? And so parents are saying, what's wrong with my kid? Do they have dyslexia? And they're saying, well, we can't say that. And so then parents are like, what in the world are you doing? Like, what's the purpose of your job? Like, you know something and you're hiding it from me. And I will say, with the psychologists at the schools that I've spoken to, I mean, they probably can put a diagnosis behind the thing, but based on the rules of the school districts and the states and the ideal laws and those different entities, there are restrictions on what they're allowed to do. So they might be able to say, if they weren't in this position, yes, your kid has dyslexia, but they may not call it dyslexia in that setting because of the other things. And so I know it isn't always feasible or necessary, frankly, to get outside testing. But I do know that sometimes parents who can, either their insurance covers it or they're able to afford doing that, like that information, because there's no bias, right? For that provider. And not saying that the school district is biased, like they won't give a diagnosis, they just can't.
No.
And so then
the only thing they can do is talk about a test score.
Yes.
And yes, your test score falls in this range. So yes, they need service, but it's not a
definitive diagnosis to leave and say, my kid has dyscalculia. You don't have that diagnosis. They're getting math intervention through an IEP or whatever it is, which would probably lead us to believe they had dyscalculia. But I think parents understanding that there is value in doing that, but not always. It's not always necessary. If your kid's getting the support they need, then
you don't need
outside testing. Yeah.
No,
because I mean, that is hours and hours of testing. And if you don't need it, let's not do it. Right.
And the interesting part of that is, when you're looking at an IEP, those 13 categories are very definitely diagnostic categories. Autism, I mean, they're all diagnostic categories, but they don't get there because somebody said this is your diagnosis. You get there because that's where your score ran low consistently.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
And it's complicated. And I think that's, I wish that all the schools just automatically provided a parent support advocate, right? Where it's like but I think, there might be some mistrust or distrust among that, but it's like to say like here, yes, you're on the school side. But I think because it is so complicated and we have a lot of things going on, and I know I have some families that I see that have multiple kids with IEPs. And so they get to know the process, but it's overwhelming still, right? Like it's just so much to it. So I think parents, give yourself grace and knowing that like this process is hard and it's emotional, especially when you feel like what you're trying to say for your kid is not being heard. It feels like they're ignoring you, and that can be very upsetting and frustrating. And it can be frustrating on the other side, where you feel like your kid is doing fine and they're saying they need support. And I think, part of it is, you can, correct me if I'm wrong, you can call an IEP meeting at any time.
Anytime.
So if you had one last week and you feel like there's a new topic of concern, or you want to go back and address something, you can say, hey, I need another IEP meeting.
Which reminds me, well, because you said that, Bryce, anything you do as a parent, you do in writing.
Oh, good reminder. Yes. Okay. Talk about that.
So if you talk to the teacher on the phone and the teacher says, his math scores are going low, but we're into this 2-digit, 3-digit multiplication, division, whatever it might be, and that's really hard for him, and you think that's an important piece of information other than maybe he's just struggling right now, you turn around and you write that teacher an email and say, just wanted to make sure I heard this right. He's not doing well and blah, 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 but you think it's just a matter of, more working harder at teaching him the steps, so that every conversation you have is in writing. Because if it happened on the phone and nobody follows up with it, it didn't happen. I mean, you can go in and say, yeah, the principal said, but so that's one of the things I tell all the families that I work with is you write it down and you send it back. You can't just write it down and keep it to yourself, because that doesn't make it so. You have to write it down and send it back. So and it doesn't have to be hateful, and it doesn't have to be anything other than I just want to make sure I understood this correctly.
Yeah. Or I'm just recapping from our conversation today. Here are the parts that I heard, right? And I think, sometimes this is helpful to know too, that if they don't respond back to you, that is acknowledgement legally, right? So if they don't respond, you send the message and they don't respond. And then, when you bring it up a year later, they're like, oh, I didn't get that, but you have proof that you sent it. And they didn't respond. That means they acknowledged it. That is them accepting it. Right. So, if they send back an email, that's a different thing, but they can still say, yep, that's exactly what I said, or thanks for that recap, or whatever it is. And I think, asking for an IEP evaluation, asking for a 504 plan, there is process with a timeline on that. So putting it in writing, we used to have to mail things. Now we can send an email, and that can be
and that starts the clock ticking. Yes, it does. When you request, it starts the clock ticking, and the team has to meet. Even if they just discuss what would we evaluate for the 504, or what would we evaluate, for an IEP? Oh, we don't need to have OT there, but language, kids with autism, we almost always need a speech pathologist. So it's, that's that meeting to discuss what are we evaluating. But in writing, everything.
Yep. It will be your saving grace potentially, right? Of like, if you need it, then you have it. And if you don't need it, okay, great. That's awesome. But you can't go back and do time differently. So it's better to put it in writing. Agree.
Yeah. Learn how to do folders on the
on your email for sure. Yes. To find them. Yes. I mean, how many emails I have from my kids' school. So if I had to look up, one particular thing, it would be hard to find. So that's good advice too. Okay. So when was a time, can you think of a time where, and I wonder if this happens actually more often than I'm even thinking, where parents went in and the school went in both with different viewpoints, and they both came out with maybe a different outcome or different solution that was kind of like unexpected, but was best for the kid. Do you see that happen?
I do see it happen. I do, where we come in and usually it's because the two sides couldn't communicate. And part of that is because you didn't put it in writing. So what you heard and what they think they said, but yes, I've gone into meetings where we've been able to sit through and talk about that. We don't need that kind of a goal. Typically, that would be a lot of we don't need that goal because here's what he's doing. And yes, we'll be happy to watch it and we'll report on it again. But right now, at this grade level, he's maintaining, a C. That's the other thing that's hard for parents. A C is just a horrible, horrible grade. And so that's just not true. That's average, not everybody is an A student. And what you really want is for your child to be able to read and gather information, whether it's from a novel or whether it's from a popular mechanics magazine. The idea is reading to understand, not to have a good score. So, but we do go in and, we keep talking, and sometimes we leave and then we come back in a week or two and ask for more data. and the school gathers more data, and we go back. And sometimes there's 3 or 4 meetings.
Yeah.
But we get there. I mean, eventually.
Yeah.
And if all else fails, then you go, you kind of start moving up the ladder to either the principal or the director of special education or the director of 504s. You just kind of.
So there are different people that are kind of bigger than just the SIT team or who's sitting at that IEP or 504 plan. And so then you can kind of move up if you feel like we're not making progress. But most of the time, I don't find that that's necessary. I think we generally solve the problem within that school.
Yeah.
But there are times where you definitely, where I've had kids have their 504 IEP, especially IEPs, violated, where they're not implementing things. And that's where they said, yes, we're going to do this. And then we know that that's not happening. And we ask, followed up, and that's still not happening. And then that's when it seems like you have to move up the chain. And don't be afraid to advocate for your kid, because I think, that's the piece, is like, our job as parents is to advocate on our kids' behalf.
Absolutely. And my job is to sit next to you and make sure that whatever you say, they hear sometimes in their own language, because there is that kind of break between what is my alphabet language and what is a speaking language as a parent.
Sure.
So but the idea is, if I'm successful, or any other advocate for that matter, if we come into a meeting and we can work through it, and I don't care if it takes 2 or 3 meetings, and get where we want to be, then yay.
Yes.
Sometimes parents change schools. That's ultimately the answer for them or their child, not them as themselves, but it's just better to move and start over.
I mean, and unfortunately that sometimes is the way that it is, that you don't feel like you're going to make the progress you need to at that particular place. And I've certainly had families do that as well. So, okay. So I think, when we're thinking about the process of getting IEPs or 504s, there's a lot of parents tell me they feel intimidated or dismissed or sometimes talked over in meetings. What ideas, let's say that they can't afford an advocate, right? So, or there's not one available in the city that they live in. How do you suggest that they walk into these rooms with confidence or clarity, or to like develop a stronger voice, not yelling stronger, just like feeling more empowered?
I would tell them, the parents that I met that have done that still end up wanting an advocate, but you go to the Kansas State Department of Education, you look at those special education guidelines. There are sections. So 504 won't be in there, but gifted, speech, OT, it tells you what it is that qualifies. And so I think that level of knowledge makes the school pay attention to you a little bit more. And it's not that they don't pay attention, but again, I think we all kind of have our own jargon. So the more you kind of say, wait a minute, I looked that up and it says yada yada, the better off you are. It in the long run, it helps them know that you're not just sitting there kind of winging it, that you've done your homework.
Yeah, you're coming with data.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so do you have any stories that you can think of where you can talk to parents about persistence and it paying off, like with people that you've worked with, that even when staying the course feels exhausting, that would help them to keep their motivation to keep going even when it seems hard?
Well, yes, I guess so. Because I have a family who they had busing for their daughter, and then the next year the school district said, no, she really doesn't live in this area, so we're not going to bus anymore. And so there was there was a year of transportation on their part and talking to administrators, and then it was kind of like abracadabra. Then busing went through. So I think sometimes it's just, you just have to kind of keep reminding people that it is important to listen to what they're saying, and just going back and taking, I've had families go to district office with grandparents, with all kinds of things that, it's helped. It at least, I think, says to the school district, especially the higher up administrators, that you're really, truly intense about what you say.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you, Dr. Otto, so much for this conversation today. It has been so helpful in giving us directions and understanding kind of like where we can give and where we can take in this process, and to keep going as parents to advocate for our kids.
Thank you, because I've enjoyed this. So we can do this again anytime.
That sounds great. Thank you.
It's fun.
Thanks again, Kathy. I hope that this conversation has been helpful for anybody that is in the IEP process or the 504 process with their child and navigating the challenges and the complexity of getting a 504 plan or an IEP for your child. With that, I will say thank you so much for your time today. If you could, before you go, if you could share this with someone, if you think that this would benefit for them, and also if you could click the subscribe button on the platform that you're listening on, that would be amazing. We would greatly appreciate it. It helps us to get new and different guests. And we would also love it if you would follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and keep the emails coming with future topic suggestions to accidentalexperts@gmail.com. Have a lovely day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.